listening to the Read Aloud Revival podcast. This is the podcast that inspires you to build your family culture around books.
Don't get discouraged. It is a mutual journey. You're doing this together. And if it doesn't work with the first book, do it with the second. This is a journey of exploration undertaken by two equal participants.
I'm your host, Sarah McKenzie, and this is episode 8 of the Read Aloud Revival. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. We're glad to have you with us. On this podcast, I chat with authors, educators, and other thought leaders about the importance of reading aloud with our families. My goal for the show is to help you read to your kids more than you ever have before, and in doing so, help you build up your family culture around books. You can find all previous episodes, including show notes and links to books and resources we discussed during the show, at readaloudrevival.com. Today I'm chatting with Lawrence Goldstone, co-author of Deconstructing Penguins, Parents, Kids, and the Bond of Reading. I hope you've read the book, or if you haven't yet, I hope this episode inspires you to pick up a copy because it is very inspiring and enlightening. But before we get started, I want to let you know that today's episode is sponsored by Audible, a resource for audiobooks that I use regularly to listen to books myself or for books that we all listen to together. You can get a free audiobook and a free 30-day trial by going to audibletrial.com/readaloud. Today's guest, Lawrence Goldstone, ran parent-child book groups with his wife, Nancy, for elementary school children at their local library. They chronicled what they learned from those sessions in their book, Deconstructing Penguins, Parents, Kids, and the Bond of Reading. The book's a real gem. It serves as a guide for anyone who would like to get better at talking with their kids about the books they read together, and in it, the authors recommend children's titles they found to be indispensable. And they also offer detailed discussion plans, including the real-life and frequently hilarious responses of both the kids and their parents in the group. So, Larry, I'm just thrilled to have you with me today. Thanks for joining me, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's nice to be here.
Well, let's start by talking about what initially spurred you to create a parent-child book club. Can you tell us that story?
Well, yes. Our daughter was in second grade. And we were, and this is not too strong a word, appalled at the way they were teaching reading. Not letters reading, but how they were doing books. And by second grade, the kids are, they're a little bit past spot, but they're not into anything really deep. And we had always made the assumption, not simply from our daughter, but other people's children, that kids actually like to think. And that dumbing down concepts to kids is counterproductive because they get bored. Now, it's a challenge dealing with critical thinking with a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old because you have to find a way to put things in terms they understand. So we started experimenting in our house with our daughter in reading, having her read and discussing books in this kind of odd way, and it developed into something where we thought we could do it with other people's children. So we went to the library, and we suggested it, and they were, I won't say skeptical, but it sounded to everyone before we started these, as if we were doing something that was going to completely lose the kids. Right. And we did it, and we found absolutely the opposite was true. And one thing I should add, though, even though the book only goes up and deals with elementary school, when the kids who had started in my daughter's grade, in second grade, when we got to the end, when we got to 5th grade and they moved into middle school, they didn't want to stop. And we eventually got to the point where we were doing books. We got to, I think, up about to be 8th grade. I think we stopped right before they went into high school. And we had this core group and kids that had come in along the way. And if you want an incentive, there were a remarkable string of 800 SAT scores for the kids we had. One of them is a reporter now in Indonesia. The other one works for BuzzFeed.
Oh, very cool.
We were doing books where the kids, we were doing things like All the King's Men in ninth grade, and really, really heavy-duty stuff. And the discussions were such that it was harder to stop because of the parents. So what we discovered over the course of doing this is that it really does, if you respect children as not, they're not miniature adults, but they're actually thinking beings, and you find a way to reach them and engage them on that level, it's something that lasts with them for a very long time.
Well, I love that, and I actually glad you mentioned that, because I was rereading your book yesterday, and I had my little highlighting finger out because I was reading it on my Kindle, and I kept highlighting until almost the whole book was orange. But one part that I definitely wanted to mention was toward the very end, and you say, let's see here. Kids enjoy depth. The idea that a boy or girl will only be interested in discussing a book in a superficial way is another misguided assumption. As a result, there has been a trend away from critical analysis and toward personal identification, as in,
right.
I liked this book because the main character has a cat and I have a cat. And I just cracked up laughing. That's just so much.
It's what you will run into this all the time. The question is, did you find a personal identification with it? And you can ask, 99% of elementary school parents, and they will say, yes, my son, daughter had that assignment. Did you feel a personal identification with any of the characters? Well, that's great to a point, but you don't get anything. Now, that is a perfectly valid question if you take it to depth. See, the trick of this is, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about how we did it, but the real trick is not any specific formula, but a way to get to depth with the kids.
Okay.
It is a way to find a way to get below the surface. And we'll talk about, I know that you're interested in the whole mystery as the only genre, so we will do that kind of thing too. But for the people who are listening, this isn't something where you have to, walk in a track. In fact, just the opposite. The more flexible the parents are, the more they listen, the more they engage, the more they're in a conversation where you have two active parties, the better it is. And the joy and the book, and remember, one of the great things about a book that you don't get from visual media, and this is really important in a computer age, is when you're engaging your mind's eye, when you have to use words on a page and create in your own head what's going on, that in itself is a higher level of thought than simply accepting a visual input from a computer screen. Mm-hmm. So all of these things work to not simply develop children's critical skills, but to make them enjoy doing it.
This echoes what Adam Andrews said in the second episode. One of the things he said was that what we should be asking a book is not what do I feel about it or what do I think about it, but what is the author saying to me? And so I think that's what I hear you saying by going deeper instead of just asking kind of that surface question of how do you relate to the character in the book.
This isn't about you. This isn't an exercise in how do I relate to this. It is an exercise in how does the author, what is going on? What made that writer? What is the message? What are they trying to say? How are they trying to manipulate me? What are they trying to get me to believe? In the book, I have a couple of examples, Nancy and I have a couple of examples of books where we thought the author cheated. And one of them is an immensely popular book where the author is probably going to want to hunt us down. But when a writer sits down, they are trying to get you to believe, to see things a certain way. And whether or not you decide to agree or disagree with the author, you should be aware of what the author is trying to say. So to a great extent, critical thinking involves taking yourself out of it.
Yeah.
It involves figuring out what's going on the other end. It's not an ego exercise.
Right. Well, and that's one of the big points that you make in your book too, I think, is that kids want to go deep and they're really thrilled to do that. Maybe what it comes down to is kind of going into a conversation. Well, let me back up a little. When I talk to my kids about books, I feel like they are more responsive and we get further if they have the understanding that I'm not looking for a specific answer. So we're just kind of digging in together.
Right.
Like we're on the same team, you know.
Yes, it's a process.
Yeah.
You know, I used to be in another life. I was a bad actor for a while, and every acting teacher will try to get you that it's the process, not, you know, it's all in the doing. It isn't. If you look for the result, it's going to come off badly, and we've all seen enough bad acting, you know, to know that. And it's the same thing. It is a process where you get the interchange. One of the things we found when we did these groups, and it's in the book, is that when a point was made in the group, it would line up parents and children on each side of the issue. It wasn't as we might have feared, actually, that it was going to be parents on one side and kids on the other. It would be some parents and some kids and some parents and some kids. The argument itself, the point itself, the point of view itself. And the other thing we found is that once the kids got used to it, and I'm talking about second, third, fourth grade kids, the level of response we were getting for them was remarkably sophisticated, and in many cases, more sophisticated than we were getting from the parents.
Wow.
Because the parents are bringing their baggage. The parents are bringing, well, I read this, and, you know, I read this person. And
what does he want me to say, probably?
Right, and where the kids are just going, this is what I got out of the book.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have all of this extra. And what we found is the kids were doing things like Animal Farm in fourth grade, which is my favorite book.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, because it's a book that exists on 3 levels, and the third level is perfect for fourth grade kids. And they would get to that more quickly, more profoundly, and with less resistance than the parents.
Why is that
great.
Because the parents are trying to look smart or like give you the answers that they think are the right answers, or
no. I don't think it's anything like they're trying to. Yeah, I mean, you always get people who are trying to look smart. There are people in every group who want to be smarter than you. But that's the way that you're going to run into in all forms of life. No, it's simply because the parents have often gone through life, through college, through graduate school, through successful careers in business, and never really understood the essence of critical thinking. Where the kids don't have any baggage. They don't have a lot of, I was in college once, and I had this professor I loved, and I took him for 1,000 courses. And I got up once and I spouted, and I was quoting all of these people who agreed with me, and he looked at me and he said, "You have the facts, but you don't have the understanding." And he was completely right. And a lot of people will. One of the brilliant things about, going back to my man Albert, about Einstein, is that he will take complexities like relativity and could devise a thought experiment that's so simple. Like, there's a person, 2 aliens are dropped down to Earth. None of them have any frame of reference on the planet Earth. One of them is standing on a beach and one of them is on a ship. And the ship is moving past the beach. Which one is moving? And of course, it depends. If you don't know one is a beach and one is a ship, to the person on the ship, the person on the beach is moving. And the person on the beach, the person on the ship is moving. You go, aha, that's relativity. Now, you got to be incredibly smart to come up with something that simple.
Yeah.
Parents have all of this factual stuff. And what they think, a lot of people are raised to think that the more facts you can throw at a problem, the better the argument. When kids just go right to it. They don't have any of that. So they go, well, I think that Benjamin the donkey in Animal Farm, blah, 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 blah. And you just go, right.
Huh. Okay.
So it was an amazingly cool thing.
So let's talk about that a little bit. About how you carried this off. I love the underlying idea of treating all books as mysteries, and I think that's probably the main principle of what you're getting at with the book. Am I right when I say that?
It is one of the two.
Okay.
The other that's one, and I'll talk about that in a second. The main thing is we have a progression. What's the writer writing about? What's the story the writer used to illustrate to make this point? What characters? The main thing is to understand that any work of fiction, nothing's there by chance. Everything, all the characters, all the settings, and setting is another character, all the specifics of the book are structured in such a way as to get the author's point across what the author's writing about. And the better a writer is at structuring that mystery, at propelling you through the book, so you want to find out the resolution, that you don't know the resolution. That is, I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, but everybody seems to. But nobody knows what's going to happen. Now that's an action movie, but it is also a mystery, because people are tuning in every week, because the people who have created that series have been remarkably successful in not letting people know what's going to happen. So once you have a sense that everything is a mystery, that you're working your way through to a resolution, then the one thing you're thinking in terms of is, what's the author's skill in getting me there? Is the author, two things, is the author playing fair, or is the author like withholding a piece of information, or twisting a character, or making something convenient, where to the average reader, it just doesn't, they don't know exactly where necessarily, but it doesn't feel right? Or is it something that you just are absolutely propelled, where you must keep reading to find out what's going on? And has nothing to do with murder or crime or the traditional elements of mystery. This has to do with how good are these writers at creating these characters where you want to know what's going to happen. So that's what we meant, that every good book is a mystery.
Yeah. So then you approach every single book kind of as a detective with the kids.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And by the way, everybody loves playing detective.
Right.
You can say you're an intelligence analyst, you're a detective, whatever you want to do, but playing book detective. And again, going back to what I said, the main thing is, if you're also playing detective to try to figure out the motive of the crime, which is, what is the writer writing about? You're trying to cut through the character, the story, all the little stuff that writers put in to disguise it, and get right to the core. And the core is, what is the message of this book? What is the writer trying to get me to believe? When I finish this book, if the writer had his or her way, how would I be thinking a little bit differently about something than I did before? And all the books we pick, even from Mr. Popper's Penguins, which is the first book we ever did, the writer, or writers in this case, have something they want the reader to come away with, a message. And the subtlety of that message varies depending on the skill of the writer. But the detective sifts through the clues, which are character, plot, setting, pacing, and decides this is the solution.
Yeah. I think one of the things I love about that is that if we are able to kind of do this alongside our kids for a few books, then they learn how to do it, develop kind of the habit of doing it, so that when they're doing their own independent reading, and for myself, actually, as I'm doing my reading, maybe getting into the habit of not just reading a book, but asking myself that question: what is the author trying to say? Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't have to do it in a rigorous way. You do it just in the course of it. You go, oh, wait a minute here. What's going on? Or, oh, that doesn't make sense. Or, oh, I would not have expected that character to do this. Or, oh, that's very interesting. I didn't see it that way before. Or I didn't see it that way before. And I agree with, that kind of thing. You do it as you don't do it, it's not like it's not fun. It simply adds another element to what you're doing. And it actually, in our experience, for adults, children, it makes it more fun. And the people we have dealt with on this level have all become readers. And the kids now, my daughter is out of college. So we were talking about second grade. We started these 17 years ago or something like that. Mm-hmm. And these kids are all off doing these amazing things.
Very cool.
Yeah, oh, that is great.
Yeah, I bet there's, some element when you're in the thick of it of, not knowing if what you're doing, makes a difference, I think, within parenting, and so that's awesome.
Oh, yes, it is. Talk about everything's a mystery.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, so give us a little nitty gritty. What exactly, what would a book club session look like?
Well, what we have found is you don't want too many and you don't want too few. So somewhere between a total of 8, not including the moderator, and 8 is about the minimum. I mean, you can do this with less. You can do it with just you and your kid. But if you want a real group, 8, four parents, okay. 4 kids.
Okay.
And probably going to 16, 8 parents and 8 kids. Any more than that, then what you don't want are a lot of people sitting and not talking. So because the larger the group, the more the people who are naturally shy won't feel the need to participate and will be able to kind of blend in. And the more the people who just want to answer every question and show you how smart they are just on absolutely every moment will dominate, and you have to say, no, let's call on John or Jane or Jim. Mm-hmm. And so it can't be too big, can't be too small. I'm talking about optimal. I would say if you're going to go choice between too big and too small might work. If you get 2 or 3 parents with kids who are enthusiastic, 6, 4, that works. The really big ones almost never work.
Okay. People just maybe don't feel comfortable enough to really.
Yeah, and that's right. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get to the point that it gets electric, where people want to raise their hands, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and again, the moderator. This is not something. The moderator has immense responsibility. You have to engage everyone. You have to keep the conversation moving. You can't. Every session, there will be someone, generally a parent, who wants to send it off on some kind of personal tangent. And you have to, and given that people who do this on their own, almost everybody in the room, they're kind of friends or acquaintances, the moderator has to go, yeah, that's right, but that's not what we're, let's get back to that. And of course you never do.
Yeah.
Right? You just, and so, and picking and making sure nobody's dominating the conversation and knowing what you want to do. The most important thing in running one of these groups is to have a sense of the book yourself, is to have read it. And you don't even have to be right, by the way. This isn't about being the smartest person in the room.
Okay.
This is just about someone who's saying, what we're trying to do here is figure out what the author had in mind. Why this character? Who's the protagonist? Who is the antagonist? Who is the character moving? Is the protagonist a sympathetic character, like Mr. Popper, or is the protagonist an unsympathetic character, like Napoleon in Animal Farm? So you have a sense, and that gives you a sense of where the author's coming from. A non-sympathetic protagonist is generally going to be probably a pretty dark book. But there are protagonists that are supposed to be sympathetic that turn out to be less so when you examine them, which usually means that the author was loading the dice. which is the giver, since you've read the book.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And there are times where an unsympathetic protagonist, a seemingly actually develops levels that you say, oh, I don't feel as badly about that person as I thought I would. Meaning that you've come to understand that human behavior is not all that simple, and that sometimes we have to learn to see things from other people's points of view. You know, the big deal about all of this is this isn't a sterile activity that just lets you get good grades. Yeah. You walk away from this with an understanding of how people who disagree with you think and feel, with a respect for other people's points of view.
Yeah.
That even if you never change your own opinions, you will have an empathy where that will serve you well as you go through life, where what you're learning is not to make these radical, absolute decisions, but in fact to say, that is a person I don't agree with, that is a point of view that I didn't agree with, but, you know, I kind of see where it came from.
Yeah, right.
I still don't agree, but okay, it's an honorable point of view, kind of thing. So the main function of this is it's not just teaching kids to be smart, which is nice, you know, or more effective thinkers, but also to be more open to the world, which is for us a very big deal.
So one of the things you mention in the book is the need for a blueprint. So, and I like how you're saying that the leader doesn't need to be the expert; they just need to be the facilitator, kind of come alongside.
Right. So, and to be firm about it.
Yeah.
To have a sense. In fact, the leader, as a moderator, I learned as much as the kids do, and when you do the books, as we used to, when you do the books from year to year, every year I'm better at doing the books because of what happened in the previous year when some adult or kid, usually a kid, gave me some insight that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
That is the thing, and I'm stressing this, and I'm not kidding. I learned much more from the kids than I did from the adults.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that.
I mean, just kids are so cool. You just have to tap into it. Yeah. You have to learn how to speak to them in a way that they will speak to you back. And because the purity of their ideas is glorious, and the wisdom that they have is not colored by all sorts of things that we bring in to justify our own actions. I mean, if you talk to anybody you know, or even don't know, or listen on TV, people who are doing really reprehensible things, and you walk away and you say, that's hooey. But you talk to a kid's set of values does not have any of that. They are very pure. They are very honest. So what you get back from them is a lot of times, well, this is how I should be thinking about this.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so as a moderator, this experience for parents it's perhaps better than it is for the kids. But about the blueprint, you have to. That's what I was talking about before. When you go in, you start. What's the writer writing about? What do I think the writer was doing here? In White Lilacs, which is a book we did. What's the writer trying to get across? Well, there was the Texas town. I'm not going to give you the details because I'm hoping everyone listening goes out and reads the book and buys Half Magic and all of that and does these. But there's a particular point of view. What are the characters? Who are the characters? Why are they in there? Why pick a character that behaves like that? Mm-hmm. Why not have the character do something else? Again, every writer of fiction, for little kids, for adults, romance fiction, crime fiction, spy fiction, every novel is not done to chance. Every novel is done with specific decisions made on where to set it, who populates that setting, what traits they have, how they behave throughout the book, what the conflicts are, how the conflicts are resolved, who wins, who loses. All of this is part of the plan. So as a moderator, the blueprint is you go in and you say, what's the overriding, what's the point here? What's the overriding message? what's the story the author chose? What is the story the author chose to illustrate this? Who are the characters? What is the setting? Just to have all the elements in your head. And so when you start to talk, you examine the clues. It's a crime scene. You know, if you're a moderator, it's a crime scene. You just walked onto the crime scene. So you take your pad you take your pad or your blackboard, you write down the characters, what are their traits, who's the protagonist, what's the conflict. You're walking in, you have seen the crime scene before anyone else. And then you're opening the door and you're letting everybody into the crime scene and they're examining the clues. You are guiding them. Which clues are significant, which ones are not. That's what I meant by a blueprint.
Yeah.
Once you know what the author is writing about, you get a deeper sense of who the characters are. And that's something that's part of your experience. It's every bit as much of your experience as people you meet, just casually, day to day. And we all say, Mr. Jones reminds me of Ed Smith, who I knew. But we're not teaching kids to do that with the books they read. And they should be doing it with the books they read.
Yeah.
I don't know, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain in The Killer Angels is a real person. Just, he reminds me of Hazel in Watership Down, who's a male rabbit, even though his name is Hazel. And so you get all of that, and then you start, that's where the body, look, as adults, we need a body of information to critically think. As a kid, it's not that big a deal. It is very pure. But as adults, we are dealing with more complex problems. And in order to solve that, you bring in your own experience. And the more you recognize what your experience is, both in your reading and in your just personal interaction, the better you're going to be at it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that appeals to me as a parent is that I want my children to wrestle with big ideas and be exposed to hard realities, I guess, in some degree, in some safe degree, and while they're at home, under my wing. I guess
right.
Doing it through books seems to me like a brilliant way to bring the world to my child's doorstep and, hook arms with them and then figure out why people act the way they do and what.
That is completely right.
Yeah.
And you're preparing them when they're not under your wing and they're not at home.
You're right. Right.
That's what you're doing. You're giving, what do we do as parents more than give tools to our kids to be able to lead healthy, happy, productive lives? Well, this is one of them.
Yeah, and encountering maybe the villain or, the dark side of humanity in a book and being able to close that book. And it seems to me like a safer but more effective because, these books...
It's more effective, whether it's safe...
That's what I think is, when I hear people say that reading is like an escape, I cringe a little bit because in my mind, I think of reading as preparing us to live or helping us live more fully or relate to people in our life. Reading is for life. So
Sarah, it depends what you read. If you're going to read garbage, and there's a ton of it, if you're going to read to escape, you will escape. If you read things where you want to read somebody who says what you want to hear, or has a plot that you already know the ending, or has characters who are set up who are going to end up exactly where you want them to be, which is 90% of what is sold, well, you're not going to come away with anything. But if you're interested in learning and growing as a person, regardless of what your beliefs are, well, you're going to read things that are a little more challenging, where you're going to have to contend with a point of view that you don't agree with, but that is presented in a way that's persuasive. Going back to your very first question, what got us doing this? Mm-hmm. We believed in our souls that to develop really good habits, good thought habits, that the direction the school was saying, we moved to this town because the schools were supposed to be so good, and the direction that they were sending these kids, we just believed in our soul was the wrong direction, and that we had to do something that was within what we passionately believed. So we had no idea that they would take off the way they did. We had no idea that we'd be doing this in 8th grade, and we actually did go to 9th. And then the kids had all this high school work. But that the same kids would stay with us, and that nobody would want us to stop, and that we would get calls. We had no sense of that. What we started as a purely selfish thing because we wanted our kid to experience reading and ideas and books in a way that we believed would engage her and make her thirst for them and make her a wiser, happier person. So everything we're talking about comes right back to that.
Very good. Well, the listeners to this podcast are pretty much parents who want to get motivated and inspired to read aloud more alongside their children. So if you could just tell them one thing that you want them to take away, and I know there's so much more than that to take away from this podcast, but what is one thing you want them to know?
Don't get discouraged. It is a mutual journey. You're doing this together. And if it doesn't work with the first book, do it with the second. This is a journey of exploration undertaken by two equal participants. And journeys of exploration means sometimes you get stuck in the woods. Sometimes you have to backtrack. Sometimes you have to do all the things that it takes in life to achieve a result you want. But this, whether it is a book group or whether it's personal or however you want to do it, reading this exercise is one of the most rewarding you can ever undertake.
Yes, I agree. I agree completely. As a parent, I feel like it's probably the most rewarding thing, one of the most rewarding things I do with my kids. I'm always floored by the connections we make. And I think it does, when you're kind of building your family culture around this idea of talking about books together, I don't have kids that are grown yet, but you do. So, I bet you and your daughter can look back on and remember favorite characters or conversations you had. And
yeah. I mean, she is an absolute reader. Mm-hmm. She's a science person and she reads a lot of technical stuff, but she still goes back and she's always looking. What do you have that I haven't read? Well, you can try this, you can try this, you can try that. Every time she comes to visit, we give her something, and she walks over to the pile of books.
And even outside of just her reading life, surely the conversations you had and the characters and the stories and the ideas that you encountered formed part of who she is. So I think that's just fabulous.
Well, I will refer you to one thing. There was a Father's Day blog on Book Reporter that I was asked to participate in. So anybody who's interested can go to that because it's an incident. It is an incident about reading with my daughter, myself, and my wife. And it's just go to Book Report and go to the Father's Day blog.
I'll look it up and I'll link it up in the show notes.
It was this remarkable. Emily was 10 or 11, and it was just this remarkable experience, and it epitomizes what we're talking about. Although I'm not plugging it, but it is the absolute epitome of what we're talking about.
Sure. Okay, yeah, I'll look it up, and I'll make sure I put a link in the show notes, as well as a link to your book. I hope everybody listening gets their hands on this book. It is... I borrowed it from the library a couple years ago and was sort of floored. A few bloggers who I really highly respect were talking about it. And I'm going to link to them too, because there are a couple of bloggers who I think have done a really beautiful job of creating book clubs based on what they read in Deconstructing Penguins. And their blog posts are really, really enlightening. So Heidi and Hannah, I'm looking at you, and I'm going to link to some of your posts about the book clubs that you started based on the Goldstone's work. And of course, I'll link to the book. I hope everybody gets their hands on it. Larry, where can our listeners find you online?
I have a website, www.lawrencegoldstone.com, where you found me. Yep. I'm on Facebook, but actually the website's better.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you so much for talking to me.
Well, you're very welcome. It's always, as you can tell, I never tire of talking about this stuff, and I very much appreciate the opportunity, and good luck to everyone who's listening.
Now it's time for Let the Kids Speak. This is my favorite part of the podcast, where kids tell us about their favorite stories that have been read aloud to them.
Hi, I'm Isabel, and I'm 5, and I live in Nebraska. And I like 7 Loaves of Bread because it has really nice pictures and words. And Rose learns a lesson it is as easy to make 7 as it is to make 1.
Well, that's another episode of the Read Aloud Revival complete. Hey, if you want to help me get the word out, I would really appreciate that. One of the ways you can do that is by sharing the podcast on social media, telling your friends and family. Another way is to head to readaloudrevival.com, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a place where you can find a flyer to hang up at your school or public library and throw that up and let people know that we're on air so they can come find us. Also, one of the best ways to get the word out is just to leave a rating or review in iTunes. That makes a huge difference with how widely visible the Read Aloud Revival podcast is on iTunes. I appreciate every single one of your efforts to help me get the word out. Remember, you can find today's show notes at readaloudrevival.com. Just look for episode 8. Whenever you make any purchases at Amazon through the links on the show notes, that supports the podcast. So it doesn't even have to be the things I recommend. It can be anything you're purchasing on Amazon at all. And we appreciate every single one of those purchases. Well, I think that's it for today. So I hope you go build your family culture around books. Hey, Posey, want to help me say goodbye to our friends?
See you next time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.